Bob and Bob. It's just us.
Correct. This is an internal meeting. There are no Bobs.
Morning.
And Bobs.
Good morning.
All right, so
Good morning.
good morning, but it was posted as a public meeting, isn't that right?
Yep.
Good morning.
Noreen, you're muted.
There you go.
Good afternoon.
Mara, welcome.
Hi, Maura. Can you
Noreen,
hear
do you
us?
have audio? I don't think she has audio. No.
Yeah,
Okay, does
So-
everyone have his and her equipment working? So your audio's on, your, you can speak to us, we can hear you one way or another.
Yeah,
This is-
Noreen just sent that message through. She can't hear anyone.
No.
Well, I think her,
I just
On your own
responded to her
computer,
that we
Maureen.
can hear her. I just messaged her, so
Okay.
she knows we can hear her.
Okay, so it sounds like we're set to get going. We've got a full agenda today. As you folks know, we're going to look over some of the errors and omissions. We'd like to take a little bit of time to go over some of the definitions. So we were thinking maybe take a half an hour for those two topics, and then really dive deep into the home occupation and home-based service businesses for maybe another hour or so, and then we'll reserve the remainder of the time for the last two items, which is just accessory apartments and subdivision phasing.
okay, but before we start that, I'd really like to know what, how you want to organize this or how it would be best organized. It was decided at some point that I would have to chair the regular meetings with Bob and Bob and the entire group because it's a public meeting. What is the requirement now for this type of meeting where there are internal meetings? Is there a requirement?
These will be handled the same way. The only difference is that the Bob and Bob are not here. That's the only difference. They're being handled the exact same way. They're being publicized on the website. They're being recorded. So the only difference is that we do not have our consultants here, but otherwise everything stays exactly the same.
Okay, then I'll be chairing it. So if you want to speak, let me know. And what Jed has laid out, we can do the definitions part first and move on from there. If it takes a half an hour, fine, but if we finish sooner, we'll move along. So as last night when we were discussing this planning board, Jed observed correctly that we'll be really returning to definitions probably over and over as issues arise during this process. So don't imagine that this is the only conversation about definitions, but let's start there. And on the errors, oh, you want to just,
Completely up to you. I'm just sharing errors and omissions, but if you want to hit definitions, we can do that as well.
right, we either place, but let's get going.
Definitions, there you go.
Okay, if we want to do the errors and which will it be?
Let's stick
We've
with
got
definitions.
definitions up on the screen.
Okay, so let's go with definitions. And Michaela, you're taking the notes?
Yes, I can take notes, absolutely.
So you're recording, if any, would call them interim decisions are made, you're writing down what it is we think we need to do. Okay, so let's begin in the area of structures. Structures should be clear. Everyone agrees with that. Do people know what we're starting with as far as structures are concerned?
So what we figured is Noreen had sent this item to us. Perhaps she could speak to this item, but in a larger context, what we want to sort of get from folks is, are there items in the definitions that need to be changed? Or if there are items that need to be added? And if so, if there's any suggested language, please send it to us. Or if there's just items that we need to research and do more work on, we could discuss those. But for this particular item, structures, I'll yield the floor to Noreen, because she was the one who sent it over to us, provided that her audio and microphone is working.
Hi, I think I'm good now.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Okay, so just speaking for the zoning board, we have had some unusual circumstances where, I don't want to get lost into the weeds here, but we've had circumstances in the past where people have suggested to us that sheds don't count as a structure. And of course, we know they do because part of the bylaw and lot coverage is lot coverage by structure. And of course, that would be typically for single family use. It would be the house. It would include a shed if there's a shed, a detached garage if there's such. So obviously any structure on the lot should be included. So I guess what I'd be looking at is trying to clarify that a little bit, and as part of structure, and I think this again goes to the lot coverage circumstance, because typically in the residential developments zonings, there's a limit of 20% by right for lot coverage by structure. And you can increase that to 25% by special permit with the zoning board. That being said, what we're finding is with many of the smaller lots, people want to expand their homes. And the only way they can find to expand their homes is to have part of the house not count toward lot coverage. So we've had some creative people come before the board and suggest that landings and stairs are a quote landscape feature and are not part of the house. What I would assert is that if you cannot get into your house without the landing and stairs, they are indeed, even though made of a different material, because the bylaw does not speak to materials, it is indeed not a landscape feature, it is part of the house. So I think where we've had certain individuals who work with the town over a period of time, I think we need to be clear for everyone exactly what we're looking at. So when I started here, I did talk to the building commissioner, and he explained to me that by code, you need to have a 4x4 landing at a doorway. So where we had several homes that appeared to be the front facade of the house met, say, the 25-foot setback, we would exclude a 4x4 landing only that could encroach further into the street. The problem now, though, is you have properties that are at the waterfront, and these properties, in order to meet FEMA, are elevating their first floor. These properties, as they elevate, could have stairs that cascade virtually to the street in order to meet that, walking up to the second floor. So I guess what I'm looking for is for the group to come to some consensus about exactly what we're going to include as lot coverage by structure. And sort of as part of that, what we're going to look to count for towards setbacks so that we're consistent. Excuse me.
Frank and Mara, is there anything in case law that would apply here? Or we give a further definition that we don't see, but you might know?
I'm not familiar with any. I think this is pretty much left to local bylaws to define. That's
Gary, what has been the practice so far for the building commissioner's office on this?
The required means of egress outside of a door is 3 feet in the direction of travel, the width of the door that is required by code. I would suggest that you put a limit what size landing would dictate a or the setback as to something in the vicinity of 4 structure attached to the house.
I'm getting a
past.
cutout. I'm getting a cutout from Gary's sound. Is anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Gary,
We're
catching every third word of yours, Gary.
Okay, I don't know what to do to correct that. I was catching every third word of Noreen's.
Uh-oh.
So
That could be either very good or very bad.
Are you both at town hall? Is it a problem with the connection there?
I am at town hall and I'm assuming I'm fine. Is everybody hearing me properly?
Yes.
Okay.
yeah. Jed and myself are at town hall, and I have had no issue hearing anybody.
So Gary, maybe it's your computer.
did everybody get what is required by the building? A required means of egress?
Sorry, Gary, you're still cutting in and out.
Okay, aside from, is there anyone else who has input that would help to better define this, or a sense of, do we want to leave it flexible and not better define it? I mean, we do have the ZBA, they're going to have to go there for their permits anyway. Maybe it
So-
should be a case by case thing.
Yeah, so Charlotte, if I could just jump in for a second. So that's what's happened to us at this point at the ZBA. We've actually had properties that have used stairs or steps that actually are within the non-allowed setback. And the ZBA has not been allowed to count that as a structure for a setback because they're falling under a landscape step definition. They're not physically attached to the house. In many cases, they use granite or some kind of a stone, but they're extremely large. And again, like Noreen says, it's happened a lot in these areas, closer to the water that have smaller lots, and they're just trying to emphasize the size of the house. So they're expanding the footprint of the house as much as possible to take up all of the coverage. And then they're adding these landscape features, which are the only entry into the properties. But the ZBA has not been able to define those as structure because they're falling under the building definition of a landscape feature. And it's happened more than a dozen times this past year. It seems to be becoming more and more frequent. And once one application uses it, because many applications are represented by, in general, the same group of attorneys, it just becomes an automatic with all the applications. They say, okay, this is what you do, and this is how we get around the steps. We've had the same thing coming up with lot coverage, like Noreen said, even including the parking and what she sent you from engineering. They're trying to get around the lot coverage by structures, parking, and paving
On Zoom, bye.
by trying to following under these pervious surfaces that in all reality aren't really complete pervious surfaces, but we can't use that. It's just increasing. So I don't know what the solution is, and I don't know if there can be a definition used for special permits that's any different from the building department. My personal opinion is if you need some kind of a feature to enter a premises, no matter what the size, that should be counted as the premises. I know they're going by a 4x4 landing, but we have cases where they're calling them landscape features, and they may make them 8 feet long. It may be take for example, a farmer's porch. Instead of doing a small landing for a farmer's porch, they do these landscape features across the whole front of the porch, which again would affect lot coverage and would affect the setback. So it's just something we're seeing very frequently. If there's any way that this could be fixed now or soon, it would be to the benefit of the town. Because you're going to have, in these areas, you're going to have people just doing the maximum amount of space they can cover. And they're going to call everything landscape features.
Yeah, so here's the other part of the problem is we do not have a definition for landscape feature. That being said, I would be an advocate that a landscape feature would be a bird bath or something decorative, right? But the stairs and a landing are, whether they be attached to the house or not, and what material they're made of or not, are part of the access and part of the structure as a whole, because you could not get in and out of these houses without. So I guess what I would say to you is, how do you penalize someone who's constructing their house of wood and therefore their stairway of wood, and you tell them, no, you can't add your stairs, but yet the guy next door is using stone or brick, so it's okay for him to build whatever size he wants. So I guess I would be an advocate of, and maybe you pick a date, town meeting or whatever moving forward, where you revise your definition to state that, the dwelling includes whatever access and stairs you've provided, and that people are going to have to either comply with the percentage, or perhaps you have a little more flexibility for undersized lots. And perhaps you say, hey, look, if you've got a lot under, I don't know, whatever it is, 5,000 square feet or something, we're going to allow you to have lot coverage, I don't know, 30%. And maybe that would be a way to provide some equity. But I think when you have, as Bob points out, these people who are circumventing the bylaw saying, well, this grand set of stairs that I'm putting in doesn't count because it's granite and it's not affixed to the house, right?
Charlotte?
Well, it seems to me that two of the things that you suggested are a better way of dealing with this than changing the definition of structures or trying to get at it there. That if we could have a definition of landscape feature and maybe change the lot coverage for very small lots, that would be a better way for the ZBA to have a tool to deal with this than trying to come up with a change here in the definition of structure. What do
No,
the others think?
I really think that you've got to include means of egress and ingress as part of the structure, whether it is detached or attached. And when you brought up a farmer's porch, Bob, that's got a roof over it.
Yep.
Normally, or are you talking about?
No,
just
I'm
like
talking, yeah, so what they would do is they put the farmer's porch with a roof, and then in front of the farmer's porch for access, they would put like an 8-foot slab or a 10-foot slab not attached to the house, so that 10-foot slab walks directly up onto the farmer's porch. What they're doing is they're using the, in a case of a porch that's long, instead of putting a small set of what you normally do stairs, instead they put a much wider area, but they use it out of, again, granite, stone. And what they keep saying is we're not attaching it physically to the main structure. So they're falling under that it's not physically attached. And in many cases, they're also trying to fall under the landscape feature that it's under, let's say, 4 feet. The worry I get on the increasing lot coverage, I understand the idea behind it. But right now on small lots, take areas of Mara Vista, Falmouth Heights, Old Silver, whatever those areas are that are highly dense. Right now, we have applications that have gone up to the 25% lot coverage. And it is a very large impact in a neighborhood at 25% on a 5,000 square foot lot. If you're saying now go up to possibly 30, it's fine if they're only dealing with stairs or access, but they're going to take that additional 5% and they're going to use that to actually build larger homes that cover more areas of the lot versus using it for the stairway. So if we could get a definition I mean, we have had cases where we've said, well, aren't these entry? And our answer has been that, well, you can't count them as an entry because they're actually made of stone, not attached to the house, and they meet what a landscape feature would be. So I think it needs to be defined specifically for entry and not look into increasing lot coverages, because the areas that are going to go for the increased lot coverage aren't the acre lots. And they're not the large lots. They're the 4,800 square feet to 5,000 square feet. And when you increase those lot coverages on those small properties, it is a very big impact to an area. And I just think that would be going down another slippery slope with applications. And they would not use that additional lot coverage for entry. They would use it for other issues, sheds, different structures, different other storage that they want.
So I have an example of Needham's bylaw, which just to provide an example, if this is something, a path we kind of want to look into. Unenclosed, covered or uncovered landings or entrance porches located on the first floor with no habitable space above it, provided that no more than a maximum of 50 square feet of landing or porch is allowed in the front setback. And the porch landing is limited to 5 feet. So there are some bylaws out there that talk about, size of, the landing can be 50 square feet, that can be allowed. And it's not in the front setback more than 5 feet. So just as an example, if that's something that this group thinks we should, a path we want to go down, we can definitely look into some other towns' examples.
Yeah, Michaela, maybe you could. I mean, that's a good idea that some of these other towns, I mean, they must be having the same issues that we have. So maybe we could see what kind of samples are in surrounding towns, or even, I don't know if there's anything on the Cape itself that might have had these issues because of smaller lots, but I mean, that's at least a positive direction to go in.
Yeah, just this one bylaw, the elements that are permitted in the front yard setback, they do say uncovered steps. But then, it talks about landings, which it sounds like landings is a little bit more of kind of the dilemma here. So
for example, you could have a property that meets the setback for the front, and now they're adding those entry or step areas within the non-allowed setback. That's the issue we've been getting into.
Yeah, and so this would say that it would be allowed if it's not more than 50 square feet. If it's more than 50 square feet, it's not allowed. If it's 40 square feet, okay, it's allowed in that not allowable setback.
Yeah, I think 50 square feet is a lot when
It is.
Number one. And number two, like I said, what I had worked out with Rod when I started here, because this was undefined, was that, okay, if you have the older homes and in order to comply with the setbacks, they were measuring to the foundation or the front facade, right? At which point in time, no stairs or landing had been constructed because they were doing the basics of the house first, right? So many of these homes appeared to comply because the front setback complied until they built in the landing and stairs. So what we were allowing was to have a house that would be set back at 25 feet, but that we were allowing a 4x4 landing to protrude from the front facade and still allow the house to be conforming. But I guess what I will say to you, the danger here is that when you jump into this abyss of landscape features, you're telling future contractors, well, you can build any type of landing and stairs because we're not going to count it. And that penalizes the people that are following the rules. So I guess what I'm saying to you is it makes sense to be consistent. You know that you have to provide a minimum landing of, and I think Gary was saying 5 feet. I think last I heard it had been 4x4, but I stand corrected if that's been changed. But I think it's fair to allow someone to have the minimum required landing, and if that protrudes further into the, say, front, the street setback, that's fine. But if that landing becomes elevated such that there are 5 or 6 stairs that go further into the setback from the street, you're absolutely adding to lot coverage by pervious structure here, which is part of the house because you needed to access the house. So I think where people are saying it's not affixed to the house, that should not be what's determinative, because certainly you could also have a shed that sat right next to the house and, well, okay, maybe it's a separate structure because it's not actually attached to the house, but it still is taking up lot coverage. And like I say, I think what they're trying to do is get it removed from lot coverage by structure, because lot coverage by structure, parking, paving has a capacity of 40% lot coverage. So it was very convenient to have it shifted to that as opposed to lot coverage by structure.
Noreen, I don't want to cut you off. I think we completely understand where you guys are coming from. And, you know, I think we need to look into what some other communities are doing. It sounds like, you know, 50 square feet, just, you know, this was literally the first bylaw I found is way too big. It sounds like we want to go more with like a 4x4 and put that in and say, okay, you can have an uncovered landing of 4x4 with no more than 5 steps leading up to it. Something along that line. And we can kind of draft something up and send it along. But it sounds like the group is, you know, I don't want to speak for the whole group, but in agreement that something needs to be looked at for this particular issue. Is that fair to say, everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is, but Michaela and group, I think it would be good to try and think of what the overall purpose of this is as far as the character of a neighborhood is concerned. And it's really to maintain a building line. And mostly, you'd have to go case by case, but mostly the steps and so forth that are uncovered are in addition to the building line. So you don't want to have created something that pushes the building back in order for them to have the kind of landing or porch or whatever structure they want. You want some rule that is going to create a building line for that street.
You know, I absolutely appreciate that comment, because what I will say to you is, we also have had people who say, hey, my landing and stairs protrudes to 10 feet from the street. So I tell you what, I'm going to demolish my house and I'm going to rebuild my house at 10.5 feet from the street. So guess what? That's an improvement over the existing condition. But people will use those stairs to their benefit.
Okay, so it sounds like if we bring back some language, we can debate it, you know, at another meeting. We want to try to be sensitive to everybody's time. So it's already 11:30. I think
Right.
perhaps the general message here is that we are, as the planning department, taking in all of this input for items that need to be added for definitions. So Jonathan was very good and sent over some items that we'll be adding to our master list. We'll be using this at every one of our internal, but also all of our recodification meetings to sort of go through it on a slow and procedural way so that folks understand that there are a lot of definitions that need to be
Right, but
taken on.
a couple of things. One, we've not covered something that's of interest to the planning board. We have been looking at one point, and we failed to get it from town meeting, a definition of structures that would allow ground-mounted solars panels that people are putting up in parking lots to come before the planning board as a site plan issue. And landed on the area of the definition of structures, and it would have a square footage thing, whether it's covered or not, so that it included ground-mounted structure, solar. So Michaela, as you're doing your research, could you please, expand your thinking to include that concern and see what you can come up with?
Okay, there's also a ground-mounted solar right across the street from us, a home ground-mounted solar. And there are a number of those around too. That's a structure taking up part of the space in the yard.
Right, and that kind of roof thing is a structure, but it somehow has escaped the definition so far. So we would like to have that included.
It's a good thing to look at. just as an addition to that, I think the reason you're gonna see these increase on these ground mounted solar is because on home sales, there has been a lot of complications with roof mounted solar. Because the property owners have leases and they actually have control of the roof line. There are title issues with properties with roof mounted solar. So I think you're going to see an increase in the future of people deciding not to do the roof mounted and try to fit in some kind of a ground mounted unit.
That's good to know. Okay, so we're ready now to move on beyond structures.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of concerns out there. Wait a sec, I have to find that piece of paper. What comes next under the definitions, Jed, that we had, that we
Well, I-
wanted to concern ourselves with?
I see Gary's hand up.
Gary?
Chapter 40A, Section 3, talks about limiting the amount of access and availability for energy providing equipment, meaning ground mounted solar. So that might be something you want to look into as far as limiting and putting restrictions on that.
Well, and the part that's exempted from any kind of zoning restrictions is just the word solar. So what does that do for us? But a restriction, a requirement to come before a board is not a restriction, is it?
Just can't place,
Hello?
Cut out, Gary.
God, yeah.
We'll definitely make a note of that. 48, Section 3. Yeah, I think, Michaela and I, we wanted to provide this idea of the definition master list, basically just for that purpose, to show that, throughout this process, we're going to be gathering all of that information. But today's purpose, we really wanted to give you guys plenty of time to talk about home occupation and home-based service business. So, without going too into the weeds on definitions today, basic premise was just show you the list. If you've got definitions that you really are passionate about that are missing, please just email the two of us. We'll add it to the list and we'll touch upon it every meeting until we get some good definitions we can bring forward to town meeting.
Could
Okay,
you
so
send us the list? Because I don't have it.
Yes, we will.
It would be very helpful to have that.
Yep. So we're going to work on a system where we can share it with everybody and they can see the changes that have been made.
Okay, and you can need to add landscape feature to that
Yep.
list if it's not already there. So we're going to move on to the errors and omissions.
Yep.
I didn't have a problem with the recommendations that were made. Let's see if anyone else did. Here it is.
So here's our working list of errors.
Yep.
And these are very simple things. Stuff like it refers to a certain section that's just an error. So it's 14.1I and it should be 14.1Z, or whatever it may be. Simple errors that can be corrected by the town clerk. That's our understanding, but we need to confirm that when the recodification gets official. Which, by the way, we're about 3 days away, so we should be hearing back from the Attorney General's office very soon. The omissions section is our main example is the accessory apartment. We've got a lot of language that was not included, and I'm just scanning through it here to give you a sense for what was missing. And so that doesn't qualify as a error. It's an omission. That's going to have, it's our understanding that will have town meeting approval. So we'll need to fix that. And again, this document we'll be sharing with you folks as well. And then the last couple of items. So I've just identified the whole idea of in single residence, home occupation may not necessarily be a by right use. And so I think we'll get into that discussion in a few minutes when we talk about home occupation and home-based service business. But the main idea here is if you find errors, reference errors or spelling errors, grammatical, whatever it may be, same with definitions, send it our way. We have this master list. We'll be going through it each one of the meetings that we have with you folks.
Okay,
We'll take
Jen,
a few.
I think on all the things about the accessory apartment, there was a subcommittee of the planning board that put this together. And I think that it would be the right way to go to have that subcommittee look at these suggested changes before our group does that. It would be good input. They're the most knowledgeable, and see what they think.
Well, so keep in mind now, everything that you see here in red that's underlined is just text that didn't make it into the current recodified
Right, but there are
bylaw.
a couple of things that are changes, I think.
I
Mm-mm.
don't believe
I
so.
don't believe so either, yeah.
I believe it's just, this is old, like, this is just language that for some reason didn't get in there the way it should have. And so we'll simply be bringing in what is in the current E code, which is the online version, into the recodified bylaw.
Okay, if that's true, then any other comments that anyone has?
Yeah, I do.
Pat?
Yeah, the way it is, it's under the tables section. And I find that extremely difficult because all the tables are very concise with columns. This is the full language of the bylaw. And I think it really needs its own, I don't know, section that it's not a table. And a table would be accessory apartment. Then you could have the other table part of it to the side. It could be a table in addition to, so it's easier to see where it's allowed, how it's allowed. But you've got the bylaw in its fullness. To try to squeeze this into a table twice over into the text is too much, I think.
Any other opinions on that? I agree with Pat, and I wonder, considering you need at least one permit, maybe two, for accessory apartments, couldn't this be moved to the special permit, maybe included in the table, but referenced to go to the special permit section, or wherever might be most appropriate?
Mhm.
I agree that that would be a good correction.
And it would avoid having it repeated twice under agricultural and residential.
Right.
It would make it much easier to understand.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on the ADUs? Okay, then Jed, are we ready to move on to home occupation and home service business?
I believe we are.
Okay, could we have the legal department tell us what's the difference? What's the important difference? Yes.
Well, it's a definition, so we're able to create our own definitions.
Yeah.
Now, I know we have a distinction between a home-based service business and a home occupation, and they're actually different, but they are also very similar. So I think we have a lot of latitude as to how we want to do this. I'm not sure that there's any requirement in Chapter 48, Section 3, that's going to mandate that we do one way or the other.
Can I put in to my memory as to how it evolved? You probably will remember this, Frank. We had home occupation, and it was being expanded to the point where they were becoming contractors' yards in residential neighborhoods. And so it became absolutely necessary to put a further definition on that. And that became the home-based service business. So home-based service business was a subset of home occupation when it evolved. Do you recall that, Frank?
I do, but it's almost like the home-based service business is the overarching category and a home occupation is part of it.
Mhm.
And I think today, given what we have gone through in the last few years and what we're probably going to experience going into the future, we're going to be dealing with this more and more.
Yeah.
And then we also have in there what I call like a home office, which is where there is something going on in the house that is connected with a business someplace else, but you don't even know it's there. Yet, is it something that we have to even consider? I don't know, but I'm not going to make that judgment right now. But in looking at this material, I thought that it's really a home-based service business, because even a home occupation morphs into a home-based service business in the blink of an eye. And I think that's what we're really trying to control.
So are you saying, Frank, then we want to flip it? Home-based service business is the main category,
I think it is.
and then we define certain home-based businesses under home-based service business.
Yes, and a home occupation is a home-based service business.
Mhm.
At least that's my inclination right now.
That makes sense.
Could there be essentially an exemption for the circumstances that are not a problem? In other words, if
Yes,
it has no people who come or go from the house, no materials stored,
Yeah.
no objectionable anything. In other words, I don't know, I'm a writer and I use one of the rooms in my house for my writing. I don't have people coming over. I'm not sending stuff out. There's no visual change for the neighborhood or no impact in any way. And that we could exempt that, and that we could then say, for other people, here's more specifically what we're looking at.
yeah. If we're looking for uses that impact the neighborhood, if there are people coming and going, if there are employees, if there are materials stored, if there's equipment stored, if there's vehicles parked. But anything totally contained within the house, and the entire operation is electronic, connected to someplace else, I don't think it's really a subject of zoning.
Mhm.
We were looking at certain criteria, noise,
No,
that is detrimental to the neighborhood, noise, smoke. I'm losing the words. I had them typed somewhere. Jed, you
Yeah.
probably know them.
You,
Visual.
yeah, you don't want any objectionable features, right? Which could include everything from a sign. So for example, obviously, if you're at home using a room, you're not going to have a sign out in front because you're not operating a business, right?
Right.
And that you can then capture essentially what the bylaw already defines as objectionable features, which is the noise, the smoke, the interference, all those happy things.
I think we don't have to do all this thinking by ourselves. When you Google this, it clearly has become an issue. Different professional organizations have come up with answers to it because of all of the electronic home operations and the exacerbation of all of that by COVID. And the things that seem to be of concern have been enumerated. We're not the first people trying to fix this. And I don't think we should act like that. And it could be that we want to rethink what we've got and start over with something that's cleaner and simpler, so
yeah,
that we can distinguish between them, the things that are by right and you don't even have to come and talk to us about,
Mhm.
and the things that you do have to come and get a permit about, and what we should be concerned about. Because now when we look at the two, they're very messy, and the only way to distinguish them by changing the name is to remember the history of how they occurred. And most people have no idea what that is. So if we were to begin with something that gives the overall intent of regulating it to begin with, is to preserve the residential character of neighborhoods, while reasonably allowing residents to use their dwelling to enhance or fulfill economic goals. That's one suggested thing off of the internet. There would be others. And define it as any occupation or business used full or part-time conducted within a dwelling, and we do have a good definition for dwelling, or an accessory structure, or both, by a resident of the property, so that you find out right away it's by a resident. And the things that seem to be of concern, as we started to enumerate: appearance, type of activity, parking, storage, operator, square footage usage, number of occupations. You don't want one house to suddenly become and actually they're quite popular, where a single building can be used as kind of a hive of all sorts of people who, a rooming house of businesses, wouldn't want that, and types of residential structures. And if we go use that as a guide, and I'd be happy to send it to Michaela to begin kind of a draft, just redraft the two things and separate it. The big separation though, I think, and I'm interested in your reaction to this, how much is by right? How much do you need a permit for?
That's a very good
Yeah,
point.
so I think we had kind of, you know, thought about breaking it down exactly as you just said, Charlotte, into really two different types of categories. You have the category where, to be honest, I'm going to take a step back and say, I think the people who are now working remotely and just, you know, they work for business that's completely remote, they're not ever going to talk to town hall, and I don't think they need to. My husband works from home. We don't have anybody come to our house. Our neighbor works from home. No one comes to his house. No one, you would never know. There's no reason to have them come talk to us. So the first category you have would be, you know, a lawyer who maybe once in a while has someone come by, an accountant. Once in a while, they're going to have one or two people stop by the house to discuss. And then you have a separate category where you have more of the potentially noxious type of materials, sounds, odors, electricians, they may have some equipment out there, a landscaper. So those are kind of the two categories I think that we need to break it down into, and how much oversight we want to have into both of those categories.
I would
Well, I
further
can see-
say it's a home office with no employees. That
Agreed.
really
Yeah,
restricts.
Or one employee, you know, so it's a
No.
number
No,
of
the
cars.
reason being, you don't, if it's a home office like we were discussing, there are no employees. If you've got a writer or somebody who works for a company remotely, that does not mean that somebody from that company can't drop in on occasion. But if you have employees, now you're starting to spread it beyond what I think we were originally talking about.
yeah, employees who will be coming to the home. I mean, you can work remotely and have 100 employees under you as long as they just never come to your house.
Sure.
Right? They want to be in California, Tennessee, Oklahoma, great. But I think it's, you know, employees who will be coming to the house. You know, if you're a lawyer and you have a paralegal who's going to be working in your office, then that brings us to that second, you know, that first category I was kind of talking about, where how much oversight do we want in that?
So then there's another category where people are actually making things on premises. So take, for
Right.
example, a baker or a potter, where they're actually doing something on premises and having people come in to either purchase on premises or delivery out of it. I know that that we have dealt with a lot of those in the last 3 or 4 years. And that's when you really have to look at traffic impacts of neighborhoods, because there's some businesses that need a lot of deliveries.
And I think
know,
that would have to fall
yeah.
under detrimental to a neighborhood.
Yeah,
Because
We'd have to,
the traffic, if you have a baker who, that's a perfect example. If you have a baker who has people, you know, from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. every morning, having tons of people coming in, that's a huge issue for neighbors who are trying to get on their way to work. So I totally agree that would have to fall into the second category where
Yeah.
that is detrimental to a residential neighborhood.
You know, what's an interesting thought for this group too, are what you want to do with someone whose business is entirely conducted off premises. So in other words, they're not separately paying for office space. So perhaps calls or mail come into their home, but that, for example, like an electrician, other than, you know, maybe some equipment that's stored, there's nothing at the house, right? They're all off doing office calls, plumber, same thing. They're not doing work at their house. They're just operating out of their house.
I think I think they would need to show that they are not doing work at their house, that they're not going to have equipment outside, that they're not going to be having plumbing and old toilets and things like that. You know, I think that's a tougher one, because there is the possibility for that to expand.
and we do look at that now. That is part of the one that's part of the usage we look at now. Is there storage? Are they offsite? And you can actually put those into the permits themselves, that this is what's allowed on site and everything else is stored off site.
What would be the enforcement of this? Because not a lot, some that I know of, very few actually, kind of grew like topsy. It wasn't the original intention, but it grew. And so is the enforcement going to be neighbors complaining?
So in Falmouth in general,
Yeah,
the enforcement action in Falmouth is only by neighbor complaints. And I think one of the other things you're gonna have to look at is that it's my understanding, and I've been on both ends before, that when you do put in an enforcement complaint, they now require you to be in a butter. You could live in the general neighborhood, but if you're not a direct abutter, it's a little more problematic to get a complaint with the town. And I don't know if that's something that's morphed over time or not, but it's issues that have come up a lot in different neighborhoods. We frequently, just for example, let's say we have an application for a home-based business, and then in those cases, our radius is 300 square feet, and we get people that aren't just direct abutters. We frequently get comments listing all the other businesses or other things that are unpermitted in an area. We don't follow those up. That's something that someone has to do with the town. But I know on a business aspect, not having to do with the town, I've had former clients or people in neighborhoods that have had different issues that they were trying to get straightened out and have gone in to see about putting in a complaint. And because they're not a direct abutter, there was something that changed at town hall. So that's something maybe building department could look at.
Mhm.
The other thing is they don't take anonymous complaints. So let's say you are in a butter property. Let's say you have an elderly couple and there's an issue with next door, and they just want to say, look, I just want you to go over and check. Is this allowed? Is it something you can look at? If you don't sign a full complaint form, they're not going to follow it up. And the moment you sign the complaint form, your private information is immediately available to the person or property you're complaining about. I've had that happen to me personally, where I over years, I had to finally put a formal complaint in. And by the time I got from the town hall to the bottom of the stairs, I had the person call my cell phone yelling about why did I go to the town hall. So it's an internal thing. It's something the town may want to look at. But I think a lot of times these complaints can be just as simple as, look, I think something might be going on. It might be just a nice conversation that people may stop whatever they're doing or comply. But it's very hard to get complaints in at the town hall. It's very hard to get them followed up on unless you go through these very specific procedures. People are afraid to do it. They're afraid of retribution. They're afraid, if you're a second home.
Yeah, can I
Herman, I
interject,
think
please?
he can
I'd
speak to
like to
that.
interject on a lot of that. First, you don't have to be a direct abutter. If I get a complaint form at all, I always follow up on it. You don't have to be a direct neighbor. If the formal complaint comes in and it's internal and I have to enter onto the property to take pictures, whatever the situation is, I follow up on it. There was an example that had to go to the ZBA for an electrician. That was a neighbor down the road. And it was based on, a non-conforming lot. I've discussed with town council Frank that regarding anonymous, because when I started a few years ago, it was informed to me at the time, the building commissioner, that it had to be anonymous. I've discussed the issues that Mr. Dugan has mentioned about elderly people mentioning about they're nervous about complaining and writing down, having their name on a complaint because they live alone or whatever the case may be. If I get a complaint that seems valid and I can see it from a public road, then I potentially can follow up on it, depending on the situation. And if I come across any of those, I will reach out. I haven't had any yet, but I will reach out to town council. But I always follow up regarding any complaint that comes in. And I haven't had anybody
contact me saying they have a hard time following up, filing complaints. With our new system, unless if I entered into the system as a valid complaint, it's not readily available for the public. It has to be on permitized to be available.
That's good information, Gary. Thank you. Jonathan, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, that was me, not
That was
Gary.
John.
That is you. I can't tell because your video's off.
Oh, I apologize. Hold on one second. Gary joined me because he couldn't, his computer wasn't working correctly.
Oh, so you're both there together.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
good.
Gary's here.
I'm still on in the other room, but I'm here listening.
Okay, good. And yet, a thought that you didn't quite follow up on is the 300-foot radius. Where does that apply and should that be?
Never heard of it.
Oh,
There's nothing in it that has a 300-foot radius.
So this was again previous to Jonathan, but I've had personal experience with not wanting to put in a formal complaint, and I've been told directly, and again, previous to Gary, unless I fill out the form and I sign it, there is no enforcement. So I like the idea that that's what's happening now, but because that's not the message that's come out in the past, maybe they could post some of that information that explains, if I can see it from a public road, if there's an issue, and then people would understand. But that's not it's not the outlook the public has had up to a point. And I hear it all the time. And it's something, again, maybe we don't discuss here. It's something later on the town has to do, but there are people that are afraid to say anything because in the past they've gotten very different information from the town hall that changes over time. At one point when Ollie was there, she told me there was a court case that came in and that's why they couldn't even take complaints unless somebody was in a butter. Maybe that was misinformation, but once that's given out to somebody from the public, from the business desk, that's what they're going to go by. And I did have the situation where I was forced, not wanting to, put a complaint in and give my personal information. I was told up front, be aware, if I do this, I'm giving them your information. And it happened within 10 minutes and it caused me a lot of problem down the road. I personally don't think I'd ever want to do that again. It's not worth it. But whatever the outlook is going to be the town or whatever their policy is, I think it should just be somewhere for the public to access so they know this is the actual policy, this is what allowed, and then they can make their decision at that point.
okay. So going back to our starting point on home occupations, home-based services, it's going to get, as I thought we seem to have consensus, that it's going to get completely rewritten, start over, begin with a purpose. And which was the first question of Bob and Bob, what is the purpose, and be clear about that. But so we know we're starting over. We know we've given Michaela a lot of work here on a redraft, but I'm wondering where the questions were asked by Bob and Bob about the special permit areas. Could each of you who has an opinion comment on that area?
I guess the other question I would like to put out to the group here too is the whole deal about a non-conforming lot. So again, if somebody is operating out of their home and they're not utilizing their property otherwise for the occupation, I don't see the applicability of a non-conforming lot.
How would that apply? What difference does it make that it's a non-conforming lot
Yeah.
for home occupation?
I would agree, though, it's in the bylaw.
Noreen, just to be specific here, you're referring to a situation where you're not having an employee come, you're not having any traffic, it's just a home office.
Correct.
I
Yeah,
agree.
those people wouldn't even be coming to us for anything, so we would be none the wiser because we wouldn't know about them anyways.
Right. Noreen, your reaction to that?
No, I would agree with that. I think, I guess I sort of question though, what the purpose of a non-conforming lot or not is. So for example, if you take our example for the electrician who has his vehicle at his house, but he comes and goes, whether his lot is conforming or not, I would kind of say has nothing to do with the review of the request.
Yeah.
Well, I think that might need to be taken a look at though, because playing devil's advocate, if you have a non-conforming lot, you have a very small lot, and you, as a result, our houses are close together, and you have a truck and you have some equipment that is, outside of your garage, and now as a result, it's right outside, I'll say my kitchen window. That might need to be taken a look at.
Right, so we do have a requirement for vehicles. And certainly if there's equipment storage, that would be something we review as well. But keep in mind that a non-conforming lot does not have to be small. You can have a non-conforming lot that has insufficient frontage, but is actually a huge lot, for example, right?
Yeah, and then in which case, no problem. You take a look at the lot and you go, hey, you're just non-conforming because of your frontage. There's no reason you can't put this on your 5-acre lot in the back.
Yeah, I just think, whether a lot is conforming or not is not any predominant part of whether you're granting permission or not. I mean, I think if something's going through the board and say they're landscapers and they want to store equipment, well, sure, where are you going to put it? How are you going to screen it? Conditions, et cetera. But I don't think the actual circumstance of a lot being conforming or not really has any bearing.
You're basically saying take it out as a threshold or a criteria for requiring special permit in
I
this
would.
conversation.
Yeah.
And make it a consideration for the board during their discussion.
Sure.
Any other thoughts on changes for the special permit section 9.5B? No? And on the
Sure.
final page of what we were given us by Bob and Bob, under the uses, any changes there?
I noticed in the industrial districts, unless I'm reading it wrong, but LIA doesn't allow residential use. And so therefore home occupation would be, I'm assuming, difficult if
Right.
residential use is not allowed.
Right.
So I think it's just one of those examples you would flag, we'll clean it up.
Okay, it reminds me though of something we forgot to bring up, Jed, under the ADUs. When it initially went to town meeting, inadvertently, the general residential area was left out of where they're allowed and should be added back in.
So I was under the impression that that was for a purpose, because
Yes.
residence does allow other circumstances.
Mhm. Yeah, it was not inadvertent, Charlotte.
I thought, oh, Jim thinks it was. All right, that's where I got that thought. It's not my own
Jim
thought.
thinks it was, but no, it was well discussed and it was not inadvertent.
So what's the
Because the
thinking?
general residence already allows like up to 4 residences, I believe, depending upon how you're doing it.
Yeah,
Whether you're putting an affordability in there. I'd have to go to the exact bylaw to look at it, but I believe it is up to 4, depending upon whether you can have a duplex
yeah,
and
Yeah, so Pat, it just goes to you can have the units, but it relates to if a unit's affordable, and it relates to also what has to be detached or semi-detached
thank you, Bob.
to allow it.
I
But-
think actually
and so
both of you
that's-
are correct. I think it was left off inadvertently the first time, and then when it came back before town meeting a second time to be added in, that's when a discussion was had. That's what I was told, but I could be wrong.
We
Yeah,
I
discussed it.
remember the
Town meeting
discussion way
again.
back with the group with
Yeah.
Virginia and
Yeah.
General. district, and then that was the
In
big
any
concern.
case,
the town
what's
meeting had.
there, the way it is now is purposeful.
And we still agree with it.
I do, yes.
Anyone have any other thoughts on it? No, okay, so. to
I
finish-
agree with Pat.
Okay. Under, nope. I think we might be done our work for today. Jed?
Right, so I mean, I yield to Michaela here, but I think what we've got from everyone is, it sounds like there's going to be a rewrite of the bylaw with two categories. Those who can do it by right and those who require a special permit.
Yeah.
We'll bring that forward to the group as a draft and we'll work through it.
I just wanted one clarification, just so I make sure I'm writing it up correctly. So I think everybody's in agreement that if you're just working remotely, you work for a bank, you work remotely, whatever it may be, you don't need anything. But then there was discussion about if you are, again, I'll say a lawyer and you have one employee. Did we want that to now be, is that a special permit? Is that falling under special permit? Was that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I would though caution against putting too many occupations in here. I would
Right.
think we
Yeah.
ought to define this in terms of the activity,
Yeah.
not what they are.
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
Thank you. I
Yeah,
very
I'm
much
just gonna
agree
put
with
it as
Frank. It
One,
begins to sound like
employee.
a class-based thing if you're not careful with it. And there's no need to name particular occupations.
No.
So that if we just stick to appearance, activity, parking, storage, operators, square footage and so forth, we will have covered what needs to be covered. And we won't get into that kind of a, what could be an invidious distinction.
Yeah, and Michaela, I would also recommend linking with oversized vehicle parking, because we do occasionally have a circumstance where someone as part of their business has an oversized vehicle. And we had one unfortunate circumstance where the person came for their vehicle and then later came back for the home-based business. So I think if somebody's coming before the zoning board, to the extent we can help them, it makes sense to take care of that element, coupling with the use.
Any other points people want to make before we adjourn for the day?
So just one thing before we adjourn, and again, I don't know if you want to handle this under definitions or not, but one of the other issues the ZBA is getting a lot of applications that have to do with are, let's say a detached garage that has a bedroom and a what's called a kitchenette. When you look over the application, the layout and what it is, it's very clear that this is a separate living area. What they're doing is they're putting in what's called the kitchenette, which means they can have a full-size sink, a fridge, and even a dishwasher. There's actually a cutout space where a stove would be, but it's shown as a blank space. The town is getting a lot of these now. And again, some of them wouldn't even have to come by special permit. Some would be allowed, directly through the building department. But it's something that you want to think about for the future, because it's very frequent now in applications to see these kitchenettes. If it's a special permit that comes in front of the ZBA, we are conditioning those that they can't have cooking facilities. But in all reality, we all know they're going to have cooking facilities. So it's something that, you'd want to look at in the future.
Yeah, I think, piggybacking on what Bob pointed out, we have people coming forward with, for example, like a 3-car detached garage, and the space they're creating above exceeds what they could have as an accessory dwelling. So this is essentially a workaround where they're sort of creating an accessory dwelling without calling it that.
We saw that on the planning board years back.
We're
there'd
seeing
be-
it, yeah, we're seeing it very, very frequent. What Noreen said is correct. In almost every case, they are far in excess of what would be allowed square footage wise to an accessory apartment. So we're actually putting, again, in our decisions that they don't meet the definition of an accessory apartment. This isn't cooking, feels and allowed, but we're doing that a lot now. And I don't know if it comes to the point where they, won't allow kitchenettes in separate structures.
Could I just ask a question about that?
Sure.
Because the applicant doesn't name it an accessory dwelling unit, you can see that it is. Why wouldn't you say, you need to label this correctly and follow that process?
Because we don't have the legal guidelines. We could put in our findings that it appears that this looks like it would be a living space. So we condition that it not be a separate livable unit. We condition it not be rentable. We condition it not have cooking facilities.
Bob, I
But we
understand
can't
your
turn
point.
them, but we can't have them change the permit. We've asked. And whenever we've asked, will you eliminate the kitchenette? The answer has been no. And we don't have anything to fall back on to turn it down to not include it, because it's not being presented as an apartment. It's not showing that it has a
Okay.
stove,
Okay, I get your point. Jonathan, you appear to disagree. What are you thinking?
Not disagreeing, but when we have when I'm somebody comes in to ask me questions for zoning or building permits are issued, it depends on, is there case openings? Is it fully separate? Is it just, is it cased opening with a kitchenette so they have some privacy, or they store their own goods? Or if that's the case and there's no full kitchen cooking utilities, usually it's still put on the permits. Eladio does it, Gary did it, Gary does it, is that it's listed on the permit. It's a single family dwelling unit only, no accessory apartment. So that way it's at least listed. And fire department now comes to me when a house is for sale, and when they do their smoke and CO inspections, the fire inspectors will call me if they see something without permits. Like, okay, is this an illegal accessory apartment? And I go back and look. No, it's not. They don't schedule until they come in and to meet with me to discuss, why it's not meeting the building permit. And we've had a few of those and say either you have to go before either planning board, or if it's detached planning and zoning, or convert back to that, exactly what it was permitted for. So we're catching them on both ends. So at least in the building department end, we inform either the public when they come in, or on the building permits themselves, that it's listed in there. So at least the town's covered in that area.
And I think that's what's happening. All the departments are trying to cover themselves because they know what may happen. And I don't know if town council would want to chime in or not, but our worry has always been, a lot of these properties are falling under that 10-year rule, that when these changes are done and nothing is actually, reported, and it's not a violation, they later come back to us and say, oh, it's been in existence for 10 years and now it's legally non-conforming and now you can't do an issue about it. And it kind of removes, everything that the towns have put in, the building and zoning and all that.
Sorry to interrupt, but not zoning, yes, but not for building. So if we flag it, so if it's flagged as the zoning's not correct and they don't come back to us, they can't, it's non-conforming, but there's no permit for it. So it's an illegal use at that point if it's notated. And for building, say they come in before you or for a special permit for something, and then they take that cased opening and enclose it, and it's been 15 years, that's not allowed. There's no grandfathering for building purposes. So it's not allowed. So they have to fix it. If that makes sense.
No, actually, that makes it's a lot more helpful to us because we do see them. Noreen can even comment on it. We see a lot of these where where even the buildings have gone up and they come back 5 years later, and what was originally on the permit is different than what's there now. And we have had to comply with the 10-year rule, even if they didn't have the proper permitting through building. At least that's how they're presenting it to us. So if we have the leeway to do something different, that would be really good to know, because that's not the impression that we've had so far.
don't you usually talk with the building department when you're looking at an applicant's?
We get a review from building, but let's say an applicant puts up a house and let's say the back enclosure of the building is 3 feet wider or 4 feet wider, or they didn't have a shed on the original permit, but now there's 3 and they're almost attached to the house. And then they hit us up with aerials showing that, well, here's an aerial from 10 years ago and that's when it was done. And no one has said anything and no one has flagged it. Their counsel hits us up with, we now have protection. And now it's legally non-conforming. So now they're going to apply for a special permit now to improve the property. And that additional space we have to look at is being allowed to redo the property. We have to say, even though it wasn't permitted, it's been there. You've shown the aerials and now we have to expand the home beyond what was allowed. And we've had a lot of those in the last couple of years. So we've all got on the impression that our hands were tied. If our hands are not tied, we need to know.
Yeah, if it requires a building permit, then no, it's not allowed. So if they did a shed that's 210 square feet, requires a building permit, so over 200 square feet, and it increased the lot coverage to 19 to 21%, that building, they needed a building permit. So technically, then I
Right,
imagine.
but that's not typically what we're seeing. What we're typically seeing are smaller changes that, even now, we give a permit for lot coverage at max. And we've since wised up to say you can't put in a shed, even a small one that you can do without a building permit, because it will cause you to exceed your allowed lot coverage. But what we've seen in the past is where that language was not present, even though you granted permission for somebody to go up to the max, they then were popping in the sheds without permission. And now what they're saying is, hey, this has been here for this period of time, so we're allowed to have it. And then because that causes their lot coverage to be exceeding what's allowed, they say further, if we raise and reconstruct, we can use that additional lot coverage.
I'm not sure where we're going to go with this. It sounds like it's just an information sharing between the ZBA and the building department. So are we through with our work on the home occupation for today? I think so, yeah. Michaela?
Yeah, no, I think so. I'll try and draft up some bylaws using some other local ones and the notes we took today.
Okay, is there a need now to set a time for this group to get back together before we get back together with Bob and Bob? When do you, in other words, Michaela, let me ask you, when do you think you would have that ready?
That is a good question. One of the best ones today.
Very soon.
Yeah. I'm sorry. When are we meeting with the Bobs next? May 25th.
Right, quite a ways from now. And we could get this put to rest before then. Maybe.
We could tentatively put one in for May 11th, and I can try and have something for that.
How does that sit with everyone else? Are you available at 11 o'clock on May 11th?
I don't have my calendar in front of me, so I'm sorry. I'll have to let you know.
Yeah, I'm going to be a maybe. I think my mother's having surgery that day, so I'm a duck guy.
We're at Simboa on Gary and I. 10th and
You're- You're what?
Not the island, right? Not the-
No,
It's a,
no, building.
educational seminar.
Oh, that sounded really great.
I tried.
Yeah. Too bad. I wish you were having a better trip. So not the 11th. Michaela, have you got another date?
We could try for the 20th. I don't want to do next week because I'm gonna pretty much tell you I probably won't have it for that.
Oh,
How
yeah.
about the 18th of May? It's still a Wednesday. It still would still be 11 o'clock. So we'd stick to what we're getting used to.
Yeah, we can try for May 18th. That'll be the week before the working group with the Bobs.
With Bob and Bob, right? Is
Right.
this okay with everyone else?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yes.
nice
So
to
May,
have-
May 18th at 11?
Well, I have a question to throw out. Is there any utility in meeting with the Bobs if we've not had a chance to go over the draft that Michaela is putting together and put our blessing on it or ask additional questions?
No, but this way we will be meeting with Michaela before the 25th. We'll meet on the 18th. But I think that Bob and Bob are also at work. And as I understand it, they're coming back with something in for agriculture.
I know that's being
Right.
worked on, yes.
Right. So if we meet the 18th, we'll be in good shape for the 25th.
Okay,
Is that good? Okay, let's plan on it. And thank you, everybody, for coming. It's really impressive to have the full legal department with us and the full building department. That's great.
it
Um,
is.
Thank you. And see you on the 18th.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good
Bye.
Thanks,
afternoon.
everybody.
Bye-bye.